The XFL or the USFL, which is better? For the first time since the spring leagues reemerged in 2019, we have two spring football leagues both playing at the same time. It was week 9 for the XFL and week 1 for the USFL, all while the NBA playoffs started. Now, I usually recap the XFL games every Monday, but today I wanted to do a comparison between the two leagues, what's working, which is better, and the one big thing these leagues must do to survive. Hey, if you like football in the spring, subscribe. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. And with my code, Thatsgood50, you're gonna get 50% off plus free shipping. Now, April is Earth Month, and if you love this beautiful place in the universe we call home, feel good when you sign up knowing HelloFresh meals have a 31% lower carbon footprint than the same meals made from supermarket ingredients. One of my favorite flavors is bulgogi, and I've never made it on my own at home. Well, that changed this month as HelloFresh sent me a recipe for bulgogi meatballs, which might be my favorite meal from HelloFresh ever. Born Italian, my meatball rolling time is a 3.7 seconder. Fastest at the food combine, of course. Now, full transparency, I had a nasty cold when I made this meal. But with the pre-portioned ingredients, I banged this one out in about 30 minutes for the fam. HelloFresh provides seasonal ingredients that go from farm to your home in less than 7 days, hence the word fresh in their name. So for fresh meals, go to HelloFresh.com and use my code That'sGood50 for 50% off plus free shipping. That's a bulgogi meatball. Alright, the difference between the USFL and the XFL is subtle. I mean, they're both made up of 8 teams, have a mix of young players auditioning for the NFL by putting out new game film, fringe NFL players hoping to get back into the league, and aging former NFL players who know this is their last chance to play football. The rules are very similar, and the quality of play is close to equal. But here's what the XFL currently has over the USFL, in my opinion. His name is Ben Anthony Danucci. He also happens to be the XFL's leading passer in yards and trails AJ McCarron by 1 touchdown for the league lead. But Danucci is an important case study for the XFL. He's playing incredibly well at the quarterback position, and he had name notoriety since he played for the Dallas Cowboys. Love them or hate them, people know who Danucci is because of his time with the Cowboys. And before the XFL season started, people were excited to watch him play. That's important for spring leagues. Fans need interest in the players. Now, week 8 of the XFL season, Ben Danucci surpassed 2,000 passing yards. That's significant when we're comparing the quality of quarterback play in these two leagues. And as someone who has recapped almost every week of spring league football dating all the way back to the AAF, I have noticed that they are all harder to pass in. Passing's more difficult when compared to the NFL as a weekly comp. So right now, the XFL is winning the QB arms race. The Nooch is basically on an NFL pace for 4,200 to 4,400 passing yards on the season. Last season in the USFL, in 10 games, only Jordan Teyamu broke the 2,000-yard passing mark. Now, part of that is because he was the only quarterback to play in 10 full games, but again, it's mostly because passing is difficult. Team chemistry takes time, so rejoice that Danucci did this shit in 8 games and should finish with over 2,500 passing yards in 10 games. He also leads all quarterbacks in rushing yards with 264 and 2 rushing TDs. He's fucking perfect! And he's becoming a star in the league, and just kept his team in the playoff hunt. Now, the USFL actually had a great quarterback performance from Michigan Panthers QB Josh Love in week 1. This is great. Love started last season with the Pittsburgh Maulers, wasn't very good, and the team was bad too, but he joined the Panthers and had himself a game for new head coach Mike Nolan, and I'm still waiting for Nolan to wear a suit on the sideline like he did in the NFL. Love was 18 of 20 passing with 215 yards, 3 touchdowns, plus no picks as Michigan beat Houston by 16. If he does that every week, the USFL will have a star and hopefully a better Love than even the Packers. Suck it, Grossi. Now, the USFL also has quarterback McLeod John Balthazar Bethel Thompson. First off, greatest name in sports history. Second, he may have a better beard than Ryan Fitzpatrick. There, I said it. But based on that beard, the USFL now has the edge in terms of sex symbols. He also threw for 300 plus yards week 1 for the Breakers in their win over the Maulers. The XFL did not have a 300-yard passer until like mid-season. It's crucial for both of these leagues to get the best quarterback play they can. It makes the games watchable, it gives these teams a face of the franchise, and it just makes everything marketable for the leagues. One area the XFL is destroying the USFL, though, is in-game attendance. And that's because every team has a home stadium, and the league doesn't play the hub model that the USFL deploys. The XFL saw a combined attendance of 75,000 for Week 9. Both the Battlehawks and Defenders played home games, and those are two of the most popular teams in the league. But the USFL fell way short of that mark, selling just 17,500 tickets for their opening weekend of football last season, and the numbers may be worse for this week's opening attendance. Now back to 2020 real quick. The Vince McMahon-owned XFL had to fold because of COVID. Prior to that, things were going very well. People forget that. The games were good, attendance was strong, and TV ratings were insane week 1. 3+ million in almost every game opening weekend. Then The Rock swooped in and bought the league from the bankrupt McMahon. The USFL formed at the same time. The Rock made a decision to not rush back the XFL and wait for a 2023 reboot. The USFL saw a window for the spring of 2022 to be the only spring football show on TV and made it happen by having all of the teams play in Alabama. A cost-cutting and necessary move while the world was still navigating through a global pandemic in 2021. And while that move made sense for 2022, after just 1 week into their second season, it looks like a massive mistake right now. The USFL hub model should have been ditched after their inaugural season. The USFL had decent TV ratings in 2022. In fact, the USFL outperformed NHL playoff hockey on some weekends and had more viewers than Premier League coverage. That was a big win for the USFL last season. For opening weekend, though, the USFL had better TV ratings than the XFL did for their Week 9 slate of games, but if you compare both leagues' Week 1s this year, the XFL slightly outperforms the USFL. As long as they can get TV ratings similar to the NHL and soccer, they can buy time to build in-game attendance, since TV is where most of the money is still made. Now, one problem the USFL faced was that several of their players who played in last season's USFL jumped ship and joined the XFL. Many of those players are also quarterbacks. Kyle Sloter swashbuckled his way to the XFL, even though it didn't work out for him as he was released from the XFL. He was a top quarterback in the USFL last season. Luis Perez, who has played in all the leagues, went back to the USFL. But the biggest loss for the USFL was quarterback Jordan Teyamu, who led the league in passing yards last season. Teyamu is probably currently the second best QB in the XFL behind DiNucci. Some weeks Teyamu's the best, but he is hands down the most dynamic quarterback in the league. He's third in passing yards, fourth in passing touchdowns, has thrown a league-low 2 picks, and has 253 rushing yards on the season. The USFL isn't as interesting without him. Whichever league can be the most attractive to good quarterbacks has the edge. Now, 2 well-known NFL QBs picked the XFL this offseason. I already mentioned DiNucci, but A.J. McCarron deciding to play in the XFL instead of making more money as a backup in the NFL was a big get for the league, especially because he ended up being a battlehawk, the most popular team in both leagues. Hell, they might even top the Chargers. Now, St. Louis has had 30,000+ people in the stands every week. That's insane. And I think it's significant A.J. McCarron chose the XFL over the USFL. And let's just be honest, The Rock owning the XFL makes it more appealing than a league whose commissioner is Daryl the Moose Johnston. I guess the criteria for running these leagues is just having a sick-ass nickname. It's why I will never own a league. Brandon Beta Soy Perna keeps holding me back. The XFL also has the beer snake. 30 rows, 60 feet, that equals about 1,440 beers, or in other words, enough to forget 24 years of Dan Snyder. So what does the USFL have over the XFL? Well, their disrespect for Gatorade. The NFL is known for Gatorade and Microsoft Surfaces on their sideline, and how do they treat their brand partners? Terribly. And I think the brands actually like the abuse of their products. It's key to getting their respect. Treat them like shit. And that's a nice way of me saying I don't think the USFL has any advantage over the XFL. Equal in many areas, but no advantage. Since 2020, though, there were two success stories from the USFL and XFL, and those players are quarterback Taylor Heinicke and receiver/returner Kevontae Turpin. Heinicke was a backup in the XFL behind Jordan Ta'amu with the Battlehawks, but got a chance in Washington and nearly upset Tom Brady and the Buccaneers in the postseason. Kevontae Turpin lit it up in the USFL last year, earning MVP honors. 316 of his 540 receiving yards were all yak, so the Cowboys gave him a chance, and he made an impact on their special teams in 2022 with a 52-yard punt return and a 63-yard kick return during the season. Those stories of success are great for these leagues, but they also need to make their own stars and eventually offer salaries more enticing than the NFL veteran minimum. In terms of quality of play, I do think the XFL is slightly better. That's just nitpicking at the moment, but I prefer the XFL. It feels more like football to me. And maybe a big part of that is I think the XFL has more noteworthy head coaches, which ultimately makes the games better. Wade Phillips, Hines Ward, Rod Woodson, Reggie Barlow. The USFL lost their biggest name in Jeff Fisher, even though he wasn't good. Todd Haley, Mike Nolan, and John DeFilippo all had NFL success, but their names don't carry the same weight as those XFL coaches. But here's the one big thing these leagues need to do to survive, and that is simply combine into one league. There's no reason in my mind why the USFL and XFL shouldn't join forces and completely own the spring. The only place they should be competing is on the field. Now, they've already shared a lot of players, a chunk of the calendar, and honestly, I look at a lot of these teams and their branding, and occasionally I can't even remember which league they actually play in anyway. Now, if you consolidate these two leagues, you have 16 teams, 2 conferences of 8, and 3 rounds of playoffs instead of just 2. My hope is that the NFL eventually embraces the UXFL, as I'm calling it, as a true minor league, sending the guys on the fringe of their rosters to work on their game in the offseason. All practice squad players should be able to play in the UXFL to develop and to make more money. One of the craziest things about our most successful league, the NFL, is that there's not even enough reps to go around for everyone on an NFL practice squad. Just ask Kurt Benkert. How are guys supposed to get better if they don't see live reps? The NFL wants to have as many good quarterbacks as it can so the product doesn't fall off a cliff when a starter gets injured. Now, one big reason the XFL is working this season is there's essentially been one very good XFL game every single weekend. Some weeks we've seen 2 games competing for best of the week, and while one good game may sound underwhelming, that's actually a very good ratio. Remember, there are only 4 XFL games every weekend. That's essentially the divisional round of the NFL playoffs. And when you're comparing the XFL to the NFL, you need to keep that in mind, because until the bye weeks kick in, there are 16 games every fucking weekend in the NFL. 4 times the amount of games being played in the individual spring leagues on a given weekend. And while some games do struggle in terms of being entertaining or ultra competitive, we've gotten great ones on a weekly basis this year, and they have been different teams every week. Nobody cares in the NFL if 12 of the games played one week aren't very good, because everyone ends up talking about the 4 games that were batshit insane and entertaining. If you combine the leagues, you have the option for a red zone type broadcast. That's another thing these leagues desperately need. The XFL had a game between the Dragons and the Defenders in week 8 that boasted 7 passing touchdowns, nearly 550 passing yards, 2 rushing TDs, and both teams having their highest scoring quarter come in the 4th. More people would have seen that on Red Zone X, as I'm calling it. To me, the viability of the Spring League is all about the quality of the games. It will take time to build real fan bases and in-game attendance. You can't just expect people to magically care about a bunch of new teams where they know very few of the players. Well, unless, of course, you rob them of their NFL team and starve them of football for years like St. Louis. The Spring Leagues offer football, so I hope both leagues succeed, but as one. Football is the best sport, and the fact that there's only 5 months of it every year is a travesty. That should and must be corrected. There's a lot of capable football players on this earth, and it's stupid their only outlet was the NFL or bust. Spring football will improve fall football. We get to know these players and root for them when they get their chance in the big leagues. We feel invested in their personal journeys, and that's really what these spring leagues are about. Thanks for watching That's Good Sports, USFL, XFL comparison. I will have the best and worst of the XFL back next week for the conclusion of the XFL season. Then we've got the NFL draft, the XFL playoffs, and championship all coming up soon.